Coming live from the studio, this is All Sports with Gerardo. Thank you for watching another episode of All Sports. This is your host Gerardo, and all I talk is sports. On the show today, I am going to talk about Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and NHL hockey. Before I start the show, I hope you all had a great week. To start off with Major League Baseball, since 1893, Shane Bieber joins Nolan Ryan and Garrett Cole for having the most strikeouts through their first 3 starts in a single season. Dodgers pitcher Joe Kelly has been suspended 8 games by Major League Baseball for instigating benches clearing incident during the Dodgers-Astros series. Almost everybody in Major League Baseball, and even the Dodgers and the Astros, kind of had this feeling that at some point, especially the next time that the Dodgers and the Astros go against each other, which would have not been in the 2020 season if it would have played out the way it was supposed to. The National League West was not going against the American League West. In the original 2020 schedule, the National League West was going against the American League Central. So the Dodgers would have not played the Astros in the 2020 season. But because of the coronavirus situation, and with the 2020 season only being a 60-game season, and the National League West landed up only playing against National League West teams and going against the American League West. This season, in this short 60-game season, the Dodgers were going to go against the Astros. Almost everybody knew that at some point there was going to be an incident between the Dodgers and the Astros, whether the series was down in Houston or in Los Angeles. But at some point, even the two teams kind of knew something was going to happen. But the rest of Major League Baseball, including the fans, knew that something was going to happen. And maybe at some point, when these two teams went against each other, there would be an incident and the benches would clear. Which happened during the Dodgers-Astros series, but it didn't escalate to the point that everybody thought it would have. It actually de-escalated and didn't get to be as bad as a situation as it could have been, or as many people speculated. After this incident during the Dodgers-Astros series, Major League Baseball did suspend pitcher Joe Kelly from the Dodgers for his actions in instigating and making the benches clear during this Dodgers-Astros series. After that incident, there was no other incidents during the Dodgers-Astros series. The Dodgers and the Astros will go against each other later on this season, and we'll have to wait and see if anything happens or if there's any more incidents the next time the Dodgers and the Astros go against each other. That was only the first incident, and it was right when the Dodgers and the Astros went against each other for the first time. And we'll have to wait and see if something else happens again or if something else doesn't happen again the next time the Dodgers and the Astros go against each other. So right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Rockies. I'm going to tell you every team the Rockies went up against this past week and the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Rockies go up against in the next week. So to start off, last weekend on July 31st, the Rockies had their opening day here at Coors Field. Unfortunately, the Rockies did lose a close game to the Padres in their home opener. 8-7. In the second game of the series, the Rockies won the game 6-1. And in the final game of the series, the Rockies won the game 9-6. So this past weekend, the Rockies went against the Padres in a 3-game series, and the Rockies were able to win 2 out of the 3 games against the Padres. This past week, the Rockies went against the Giants in a 4-game series. In the first game, the Rockies won a close game 7-6. In the second game, the Rockies won the game 5-2. In the third game, the Rockies lost a close game 4-3. And in the final game of the series, the Rockies were able to win the game 6-4. And the Rockies landed up taking 3 out of 4 games and winning 3 games from the Giants. So overall, in the Rockies' first few series of the 2020 season, the Rockies have been able to win all of the series and take all of these series from their opponents. And so far in the 2020 season, the Rockies have started off great, and they also have one of the best records in Major League Baseball, and they're also leading the National League West. So far, the Rockies have looked great. They're pitching, and they're hitting good. They're playing great baseball. That is one of the reasons why they are playing the way they are. And that's also one of the reasons why the Rockies have a good record as of right now. And we'll have to wait and see how the Rockies play for the rest of the 2020 season. But so far, they have started off the season great. This weekend, the Rockies hit the road, and they go against the Mariners in a 3-game interleague series up in Seattle. And then next week, the Rockies return back to Coors Field, and they go against the Diamondbacks in a 3-game series. So we'll have to wait and see how the Rockies play going into next week. But so far, they have started off great, and they're also playing some great baseball. So that's the current schedule for the Rockies. That's the teams the Rockies went up against in the last week, and that's the final scores of those games. And that's also who the Rockies go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you with the current Major League Baseball standings in the American and National League. To start off in the American League East, right now the Yankees are leading this division at 9 games, and the next closest teams are all of the other teams in this division. And right now, the Yankees have a 4-game lead over the other teams in this division. In the American League Central, right now the Twins are leading this division at 10 games. And the next closest team is the Indians by 2.5 games. And also, the White Sox and the Tigers are also right behind the Indians in this division. In the American League West, right now, the Athletics are leading this division at 9 games, and the next closest team is the Astros, and they're only back 2.5 games. In the National League East, right now, the Marlins are leading this division, and the next closest team is the Braves by 0.5 game. In the National League Central, right now the Cubs are leading this division at 10 games, and the next closest team is the Brewers by 3.5 games, and the Cardinals are also right behind the Brewers. And in the National League West, right now the Rockies are leading this division at 9 games, but the Dodgers are right behind the Rockies, and they're only down 0.5 game. So that's the current Major League Baseball standings in the American and National League. In the Major League Baseball power rankings, the current top 10 Major League Baseball teams are the Yankees, Dodgers, Twins, Braves, Cubs, Rays, Athletics, Padres, Astros, and Indians. Unfortunately, this week, the Rockies were not in the power rankings, but with the way they've been playing and with the type of record that they have, I don't know why they were not in the top 10 power rankings, and we'll have to wait and see if the Rockies are in the top 10 power rankings next week. But the way they started off the season, they should be in the top 10 power rankings. Moving on now to NBA basketball, Doc Rivers moved into 11 in all-time wins. James Harden passed David Robertson to become the all-time scoring leader by a lefty. James Harden became the 5th player to score 2,300 plus three-pointers. James Harden has the most consecutive seasons with at least 20 games of 40 plus points since Wilt Chamberlain. Carmelo Anthony moved into 19th in all-time field goals made. Devin Booker and LeBron James have the most game-winning buzzer beaters since 2015. Damian Lillard, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson are the only 3 players in NBA history to have 11 plus three-pointers in multiple games. Luka Doncic became the youngest player with a 30-point, 20-rebound triple-double in NBA history. Michael Porter Jr. is the first rookie with back-to-back 30-point and 10-rebound games since Blake Griffin in 2010 through 2011. Michael Porter Jr. is the first Nuggets rookie with a 30-point and 15-rebound game since Dikembe Mutombo in 1992. His 37 points versus the Thunder was the most by a rookie this season. His 15 rebounds versus Spurs is tied for the most by a rookie this season, and his 67 points is the most by a rookie in a 2-game span in Nuggets history. So far, with the way the Nuggets have been playing down in Orlando in the NBA bubble in this 8-game regular season, the Nuggets have been playing some great basketball. Even with the team missing some of their starters that have been sitting out due to injuries. But so far for the Nuggets, they have a deep roster and a deep starting rotation and bench. And if you have watched the Nuggets play in the last few games, you have definitely witnessed why the Nuggets have been playing good. And if you haven't been watching the Nuggets, regardless if you're a fan of the Nuggets or you're not, you're definitely missing out, and you definitely need to watch the Nuggets. And there's definitely a few other teams you want to watch as they're playing in this 8-game regular season. But if you're a Nuggets fan, you definitely need to watch the Nuggets, and if you haven't, you're definitely missing out. And even with the games the Nuggets have lost, it's not like they've been blown out. But some of the reasons why they have lost games is just because some of the starters are injured and they have to sit out. But hopefully, by time it's the playoffs, which the Nuggets are going to make the playoffs regardless of how many games they win or lose. Hopefully, the Nuggets have their whole roster healthy and ready to play in the playoffs, but especially the starters. And hopefully, even if they don't play in this 8-game regular season, we definitely need them to play in the playoffs once it begins in the next few weeks. So far for the Nuggets, with the players that have been playing on the court, they have not been a disappointment. But there has been two players that have definitely been a surprise to the Nuggets, especially one. And regardless of who's playing on the court for the Nuggets have a deep roster, whether it's starters or it's bench players. And now that the Nuggets have been playing down in Orlando, it's definitely been showing how deep of a roster the Nuggets have and how certain individual players can take control of the team and go on to the court, play some great basketball, score a lot of points, and win games. And regardless if it's the starters or bench players, we have definitely seen players step up that have had to play due to other players sitting out due to injury. And we have definitely seen the bench players step up in a huge way to score a lot of points and also win games for the Nuggets. But there has been two players that have definitely been a surprise. And we knew what one of them could do. But this other individual player has definitely been a surprise for the Nuggets and to the rest of the NBA. And if you haven't watched what Bobo has been doing for the Nuggets, you're definitely missing out. But if you've seen what he has done, he's been a surprise to the Nuggets and to the rest of the NBA. But Bobo is definitely a talented player. What makes him so talented is the height that he has. And he's just not good at blocking shots. He's good at making shots, scoring points, even making three-pointers. Bobo has been showing the Nuggets and the rest of the NBA what he is capable of in the NBA, and he's been showing that he can play on the offense and the defense. He can make buckets, he can score points, not just in the paint, but he can also make bank shots and three-pointers, and he's been showing what he can do on defense. And you know what he can do on defense because of his height, and he's been blocking a lot of shots. So Bobo can play offense and defense. If you've been watching him, he's definitely a talented player. And if you haven't been watching him, you definitely need to watch him. And you're missing out if you haven't watched him or the Nuggets play. Now for Michael Porter Jr., we knew at some point that he was going to step up and play some great basketball. Because Michael Porter Jr. is definitely a young, talented player, and he's capable of a lot. And he's capable of having a great NBA career, whether he plays for the Nuggets or a different NBA team. And last offseason, and even this offseason, the Nuggets are going to do whatever they can to improve their team so they can advance further into the playoffs. And the Nuggets want to win the NBA Finals. We'll have to wait and see how the Nuggets play in the playoffs for this season, going into the next 2 weeks. But if the Nuggets do pursue players in free agency, if they lose current players on their roster in free agency this offseason, even at the NBA trade deadline, the Nuggets wanted to make some moves to improve their team. But some players that the Nuggets were interested in, those other teams wanted the Nuggets to trade Michael Porter Jr. And the Nuggets were like, no. We're not trading Michael Porter Jr. There was a reason why we drafted him, and we know that he is a young, talented player that has a bright future in the NBA. And the Nuggets already said, if they make a move in free agency or at the NBA trade deadline, Michael Porter Jr. is off the table. And there's no doubt that Michael Porter Jr. is a young, talented player. In the NBA bubble down in Orlando, and even during the normal NBA season, the Nuggets have seen what Michael Porter Jr. is capable of when he's been playing on the court for the Nuggets. And there's no doubt that he has a bright future ahead of him. And if Michael Porter Jr. keeps playing the way that he has been playing, especially down in the NBA bubble, next season and going into the future for the Nuggets know, and even the rest of the NBA knows, that when the Nuggets drafted Michael Porter Jr., that might have been the steal of the draft. And if Michael Porter Jr. continues playing the way he has, and he improves next season, there's no doubt that Michael Porter Jr. was definitely one of the best players to be drafted in the NBA draft when he was drafted. And there would be no doubt that he could have been the steal of the draft since the Nuggets drafted him. When Michael Porter Jr. was drafted in the NBA draft, he could have been a top 10 pick, but he landed up falling out of the top 10, and he fell into the Nuggets' hands. So when it was the time for the Nuggets to draft and Michael Porter Jr. was on the board, the Nuggets had to take Michael Porter Jr. And if Michael Porter Jr. continues playing the way he has, and he improves his game going into next season and going into the future, there's no doubt that Michael Porter Jr. could be the steal of the draft, since a team in the top 10 probably should have drafted Michael Porter Jr. If you're a Nuggets fan, or even if you're not a Nuggets fan, you definitely need to watch how the Nuggets play in their games as they continue playing in the 8-game regular season and going into the playoffs. But if you haven't watched the Nuggets or Michael Porter Jr. play in the last few regular season games, but especially when this 8-game regular season started, you are definitely missing out, especially if you're a Nuggets fan and you haven't been watching the Nuggets games since they've been playing down in the NBA bubble down in Orlando. But if you have been watching the Nuggets play down in the NBA bubble down in Orlando, and you've been watching the way Michael Porter Jr. has been playing, there's no doubt that Michael Porter Jr. is a talented player, and he's capable of a lot going into the future. And there's no doubt that the Nuggets know what Michael Porter Jr.'s potential is going into the future. And so far, Michael Porter Jr. has been playing great. And we'll have to wait and see how he plays in the final games of this 8-game regular season and going into the playoffs. We'll also have to wait and see how the Nuggets play in the final games of the regular season and going into the playoffs. But the Nuggets is definitely a team that you want to keep your eye on as they finish this 8-game regular season and going into the playoffs, regardless if you're a Nuggets fan or not. But if you're a Nuggets fan, you definitely need to watch the Nuggets. And if you haven't been watching the Nuggets, you are definitely missing out. But you definitely need to watch the Nuggets, especially if you're a fan of the team. And you need to see what Michael Porter Jr. has been doing for the Nuggets. And there's no doubt that the Nuggets know when they get Michael Porter Jr. on the court and he plays the way he is capable of, the Nuggets have a great chance at winning. And the Nuggets have a great chance at winning their games in the regular season, but also going deep into the playoffs. And the Nuggets will have a lot of potential with Michael Porter Jr. this season and going into the future. But it's all going to come down to how Michael Porter Jr. plays. And if he plays great basketball, the Nuggets are going to be a serious contender going into the future. Now we'll have to wait and see how the Nuggets play for the rest of the season and how far they go into the playoffs for this season. But there's no doubt that the Nuggets want to be a contender for the NBA Finals, and they want to win the NBA Finals going into the future with the team that they have now, and they also want to add some pieces to the team if they need to, so they can be a serious contender going into the future, because the Nuggets do want to win their first NBA Finals in franchise history. And there's no doubt that with the team that they have now, with this young, talented roster that they have, there's no doubt they'll be a contender going into the future, and they will have the possibility of winning the NBA Finals going into the future. We'll just have to wait and see how the Nuggets play for the rest of this season. But if Michael Porter Jr. keeps playing the way he has been, by scoring a lot of points in winning games for the Nuggets, there's no doubt that the Nuggets will be a contender for the NBA Finals this season. And they'll have a great chance at advancing further into the playoffs this season. The Knicks hired Tom Thibodeau to be their next head coach, and they agreed to a 5-year contract. So right now I'm going to update you with the current NBA schedule. On July 30th, the 2019-2020 season resumed in the NBA bubble down in Orlando. From August 1st through the 14th, this will be the 8-game regular season. From August 15th through the 16th, if the NBA needs to play the play-in tournament games, that is when that will happen. It's likely going to happen, especially with how competitive the Western Conference is and all the teams that are fighting for the 8th seed in the Western Conference. On August 17th, the first round of the playoffs will begin. On August 25th, that is when the NBA will do the draft lottery. On August 31st, that is when the conference semifinals will begin. On September 15th, that is when the conference finals will begin. On September 30th, that is when the NBA finals will begin. And by October 13th, the 2019-2020 season should come to an end, and there will be an NBA champion. And later on this year, likely in December, that is when the 2020-2021 season will begin. And the 2020-2021 season will likely begin at the end of 2020 or at the beginning of 2021. It's all going to come down to how the coronavirus pandemic plays out going into the end of this year and going into the beginning of next year. The Bucks officially clinched the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. The Lakers officially clinched the number 1 seed in the Western Conference for the first time since 2010. So right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Nuggets. I'm going to tell you every team the Nuggets have went up against in the last week in the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Nuggets go up against in the next week. To start off, the Nuggets went against the Heat, and the Nuggets lost to the Heat 125-105. The Nuggets went against the Thunder, and the Nuggets beat the Thunder in overtime 121-113. The Nuggets went against the Spurs, and the Nuggets beat the Spurs 132-126. And the Nuggets went against the Trailblazers, and the Nuggets lost to the Trailblazers 125-115. So in the last few games of the 8-game regular season, now that we are at the midpoint of the 8-game regular season, the Nuggets will go against the Jazz, the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Raptors. We'll have to wait and see how many more games the Nuggets win in the 8-game regular season, and are they going to hold on to the 3rd seed in the Western Conference, or are they going to get a different seed in the Western Conference and fall down from the 3rd seed or move up from the 3rd seed? We're going to have to wait and see. But there's no doubt that regardless of what seed the Nuggets get in the Western Conference, they are going to make the playoffs. So that's the current schedule for the Nuggets. That's the teams the Nuggets went up against in the last week, and that's the final scores of those games, and that's also who the Nuggets go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you with the current NBA standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. To start off in the Eastern Conference, the Bucks have the number 1 seed, the Raptors have the number 2 seed, the Celtics have the number 3 seed, the Heat have the number 4 seed, the Pacers have the number 5 seed, the 76ers have the number 6 seed, the Nets have the number 7 seed, and the Magic have the number 8 seed. The Eastern Conference is basically set in stone. All 8 of those teams will make the playoffs. We'll just have to wait and see what seed they get in the Eastern Conference, but they all are going to make the playoffs for the Eastern Conference. In the Western Conference, the Lakers have the number 1 seed. The Clippers have the number 2 seed. The Nuggets have the number 3 seed. The Rockets have the number 4 seed. The Jazz have the number 5 seed. The Thunder have the number 6 seed. The Mavericks have the number 7 seed. And the Grizzlies have the number 8 seed. Some other teams that are contending for the playoffs in the Western Conference and for that number 8 seed include the Trailblazers at the number 9 seed, the Suns at the number 10 seed, the Spurs at the number 11 seed, the Kings at the number 12 seed, and the Pelicans at the number 13 seed. The Western Conference is definitely going to be interesting to watch. We'll have to wait and see what 8 teams make the playoffs in the Western Conference, but also what teams are going to get what seed in the Western Conference, but also we're going to have to wait and see what team gets that number 8 seed in the Western Conference. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what team makes the playoffs and what team gets that number 8 seed in the Western Conference. And so far in the NBA bubble down in Orlando, that number 8 seed is becoming very competitive in the Western Conference. And so far, as of right now, the Grizzlies are holding on to the number 8 seed at 32 games, but the Trailblazers are right behind them at 32 games, and even the Suns, the Spurs, and the Kings, and the Pelicans are contending for that number 8 seed. So far, for that number 8 seed, it's a tight race, and it's becoming very competitive, and there are a few teams fighting for that number 8 seed to get into the playoffs in the Western Conference. So we'll have to wait and see what teams make the playoffs in the Western Conference and what teams get what seed in the Western Conference. But all those teams fighting for the last playoff spot and for that 8th seed in the Western Conference, that is going to be an interesting race as we're approaching the final games of this 8-game regular season in the Western Conference. So, regardless of what team you root for, if you're a fan of the NBA and you've been watching the games down in the NBA bubble down in Orlando, you definitely want to watch the race for the 8th seed in the Western Conference. That is definitely going to be one of the most interesting things to see in the NBA bubble down in Orlando, And it's going to be interesting to see what team will get that 8th seed in the Western Conference and what team's going to make the playoffs in that final seed for the Western Conference. So that's the current NBA standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. And we'll have to wait and see what teams make the playoffs in the Eastern and Western Conference as we're approaching the final games of the 8-game regular season in the NBA bubble down in Orlando. And in the next few weeks, the NBA playoffs will begin. And I can't wait for the NBA playoffs to begin in the next few weeks. Moving on now to NHL hockey. The National Hockey League Players Association and the NHL have agreed to a 4-year extension to the collective bargaining agreement through the 2025-2026 season. The NHL also agreed to a return-to-play plan with the 2019-2020 season resuming on August 1st, and they want to crown a Stanley Cup champion by early October. So right now, I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know about the return of the NHL. So taking a look at the return of the NHL agreed to a return-to-play plan with the 2019-2020 season resuming on August 1st, and they want to crown a Stanley Cup champion by early October. The NHL will resume their season in Toronto and in Edmonton. The NHL announced the rest of the regular season is over, and they are going straight into the playoffs when the season resumes. There will be 24 teams instead of 16 teams that will play in the playoffs when the season resumes. All the teams contending for a playoff spot in the Eastern and Western Conference will play when the season resumes. All the teams that are not contending for a playoff spot, their season is over, and they will have to wait to play until next season. As the NHL season resumes, the Eastern Conference teams will play in Toronto, and the Western Conference teams will play in Edmonton. So taking a look at the 2020 Stanley Cup Playoffs, to start off with round robin in the Eastern Conference, Boston is number 1, Tampa Bay is number 2, Washington's number 3, and Philadelphia is number 4. In the Western Conference, St. Louis is number 1, Colorado is number 2, Las Vegas is number 3, and Dallas is number 4. Taking a look at the qualifying round, in the Eastern Conference, number 8 Toronto will go against number 9 Columbus. Number 6 Carolina will go against number 11 New York Rangers. Number 5 Pittsburgh will go against number 12 Montreal. And number 7 New York Islanders will go against number 10 Florida. In the Western Conference, number 8 Calgary will go against number 9 Winnipeg. Number 6 Nashville will go against number 11 Arizona. Number 5 Edmonton will go against number 12 Chicago. And number 7 Vancouver will go against number 10 Minnesota. Taking a look at the NHL schedule, on August 1st, the 2019-2020 season will begin. On August 1st, the qualifying round will begin. On August 11th, the first round of the playoffs will begin. The 2019-2020 season will end in early October. October 9th and 10th will be the 2020 NHL Draft. And the 2020-2021 season will start towards the end of 2020 or in the beginning of 2021. So that is the plan that the NHL has, as they have planned out for the return to play for the NHL, and they also have a return to play plan with how they want the 2019-2020 season to be formatted and to play out for the next few months, so they can conclude the 2019-2020 season and have a Stanley Cup champion by early October. The NHL also planned for the type of off-season they will have, and they also planned for when they want or would like the 2020-2021 season to begin at the end of this year or at the beginning of next year. So the NHL has everything planned out of how they want these next few months to go as they conclude the 2019-2020 season, the type of off season they will have, and for when they want the 2020-2021 season to begin. And that is the schedule that the NHL has put in place for the next few months. But with the coronavirus pandemic and everything that is going on in regards to the coronavirus situation, nothing is a guarantee and anything can change. And even the schedule that the NHL has put in place is not set in stone, and it's subject to change, especially in regards to the coronavirus situation. And if the coronavirus situation does not get better and it gets worse, the NHL schedule is subject to change, and it will change because of the coronavirus situation getting worse. But if it gets better going into the next few months, and it doesn't get worse going into the next few months, the schedule that the NHL has put in place for the next few months, this is a schedule that the NHL wants to follow. But if the coronavirus pandemic happens to affect the NHL schedule, then there will be changes made to the NHL schedule. But as of right now, this is the schedule the NHL has, and it's a schedule the NHL is going to follow going into the next few months. So that is everything you need to know in regards to the NHL making a comeback and having a return to play plan. And that is the return of the NHL. Also, with the return of the NHL taking place as of right now that we are in August, the NHL also introduced the 32nd franchise added to the league, and it will be the Seattle Kraken. The Kraken is an expansion team that was added to the NHL, and they will play at the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle. Seattle now has an NHL team, and the Seattle Kraken will start playing in the NHL during the 2021-2022 season. So after Las Vegas added an NHL team, Seattle was the next city that wanted to add an NHL team, since they have an NFL team and a Major League Baseball team, and going into the future, Seattle wants to add an NBA team now that they have added an NHL team. And after Seattle had planned out for building a new arena so they can have an NHL team and potentially have an NBA team going into the future. Now that Seattle is building an arena to have an NHL team, the NHL awarded Seattle with an NHL team, and Seattle will be the next city to have an NHL team, and Seattle will now have an expansion team, just like Las Vegas had an expansion team a few years ago. And now Seattle will have the 32nd NHL team in the league. And Seattle's looking forward to having an NHL team once they start playing in the 2021-2022 season. And Seattle's looking forward to an NHL team, and the NHL is also looking forward to adding another NHL franchise to the league. So, Seattle has already revealed that they're building an arena for this NHL team, and they also revealed the name, the team logo, and the colors for this NHL team. And there's no doubt that Seattle is looking forward to having an NHL team, and the NHL is also looking forward to adding another NHL franchise to the league. And going into the future, we'll have to wait and see if the NHL will add more franchises to the league. But there's no doubt that there are other cities that want to have an NHL team. And there's no doubt that there will be other cities in the US and even in Canada that want to add an NHL team going into the future, and we'll have to wait and see if the NHL does add more NHL franchises going into the future. But as of right now, the NHL will add another franchise, and they are giving Seattle an NHL team. Moving on now to end the show, what to watch for this week in sports. The Rockies, Major League Baseball, the Nuggets, NBA basketball, the Avalanche, NHL hockey, NFL training camp. Moving on now, on the next show, I will talk about the coronavirus, NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and NHL hockey. I hope you all have a great week. Tune in to the next All Sports with Gerardo show next week. I want to say thank you to everybody that listens to All Sports. Subscribe or like my pages on social media at All Sports with Gerardo. Until next time, this is Gerardo.